Good morning, and welcome to another edition of Shooting Straight with me, at Voice of the Forge. And today I'm feeling a little conflicted. I have spent a bit more time than usual in between podcasts, and that is partially because I have struggled for a topic. Nothing has really made my blood boil or bring me to a point where I have actually been looking for news. As I've said in the past, this is partially a hobby and partially therapy for me. I suffer with a mild form of PTSD which affects me in crowds, and whilst I do not shy away from what would be called by others a triggering event, I am used to the idea of gradually getting yourself used to a set of stimuli which frightens you, to try and desensitize you from the actual thing which is causing you a problem. And this helps in part. Whilst I'm not speaking to a huge amount of people face to face, the fact that this is out there on the internet and can be seen by a wide variety of people does actually mean that it does in some way alleviate some of that sensitivity. I used to do a lot of public speaking in the past, so put me on a stage with footlights so I can't see the audience and I'd be perfectly fine. You wouldn't think I suffer with the things that I do. But that's because I can't see the audience, and it's pretty much the same with this. I can't see people. However, if I was on the front of the stage in the proscenium, in front of the curtains with no lights other than the one just illuminating me, and I could see everybody, then that would be it. I would freak out. I wouldn't actually be able to do that as things stand right now. So there's a nuance to what it is that I do. There's a reason behind it, but there's also nuance as to why I do what I do. And I find myself somewhat conflicted because, as most of my recent podcasts have been about more news items, this is the first time where I'm actually talking about things about myself specifically, and about the fact that Forgotten Forge Games has had an issue where we've now had to scale back somewhat so that we're now in a church hall. But at the same time, we've also met another YouTube personality called Pedantic Gamer, and we're now doing things with him. And I suppose some of the impetus for me doing some of these videos has been removed because I've got a sounding board. I've got someone else that I can talk to. It's one person face to face, and we both look at things in a similar way, which means that a lot of the time when I would actually just go 20 minutes, yeah, we're going to talk about this, I'm having 3-hour conversations once a week, and it's us just talking. And I think if we could possibly get together and be able to record something like a Skype call where it's just the two of us, I think that would be something that people would enjoy, because we both know what we're talking about and we both have solid ideas about where we get our opinions from, and we're aware of our own biases. And because we're two different people, it means that we would have slightly different biases, slightly different viewpoints, and being able to use those two slightly different viewpoints to be able to actually discuss a topic would possibly mean that we're able to get to more of the meat of an issue than just one or the other of us. Now, the difference is, of course, that he does a lot more Let's Play videos, and he does a lot more gameplay content, whereas at the moment, as you can see on my channel, I don't have any. That has changed in regards to the fact that I've just recently started upgrading my computer so that it can run at a decent recording speed, and obviously I've had the capture card for some time. So whilst it may not be an industry standard card, it is a well-known brand of capture card, which means that although it's a previous iteration, means that it will do the job. Now, one of the things that I'm not too sure about is this whole debate over the recording of things at 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. Now, people say that they can see a difference, but for me, I'm looking at it and I'm there thinking, well, they're massive changes to the file size. With the 30 frames per second, you can do longer videos, and I'm therefore asking the question, is it the fact that people want to see 10-12 minute videos at a higher resolution, or do they want the slightly longer videos where the record speed hasn't actually been at the full 60 frames per second? And it's one of those things that I'm currently working towards looking at and trying to get a decent broadcast replayability, so that some of the favourite moments that I've got can be replayed to other people. Now, one of the videos that I've got it saved, I just want to make sure it's rendered properly, is one of the cheapest and cheesiest ways to beat the end boss battle at the end of Dead Rising, because to me it is complete, pure and utter cheese. And I discovered it completely by accident. I had no idea how I was going to do this. I'd started the boss fight with this thing, and it was kind of like, well, what do I do? He's defensive, I can't hit him, I've got no weapons. And quite by accident, I'd done this thing and realised that I still actually had an offensive capability. And then proceeded to not very excitingly beat this boss over the head in possibly one of the silliest ways imaginable. And that is something that I am definitely going to be having as one of my first gameplay videos, purely because for me, if nothing else, for me, it's a personal high that I found something so ridiculous. There are other things that I want to be able to do. I've got a complete collection of Forza 2 videos where I and a couple of other people, but I will be honest in saying that the vast majority of them are me, of cars spinning out, crashing out, and completely snatching defeat from the jaws of victory in racing games. And it may well be that we can make 1 or 2 videos out of that, purely because we have a wealth of material. Now, one of the reasons why I have actually started talking today rather than any other day, because these are things that aren't new, these are things that have been on the back burner for some time, is the fact that in one of my previous videos I did actually list what makes a game. And we were talking about a hierarchy of needs and the fact that the game needs to take you out of yourself. There needs to be a skill factor. There needs to be some kind of way in which you feel rewarded for doing what you're doing. And I have just recently completed a playthrough of The Wolf Among Us. Now, I have an issue with certain types of game where they are more interactive story than game, and where you have quick-time events. Now, I have played a fair few games which, whether they be text message or otherwise, have a cut-down game mechanic. And the easiest thing that I can do is liken The Wolf Among Us to a cut-down point-and-click. It's not in the same vein as The Curse of Monkey Island, where you are able to go to various different locations and figure out the puzzles and have to backtrack through various screens and find one clue at one end of the map and figure it out at the other end of the map. And I struggled to begin with for the first few chapters on calling this a game. It was something that I was enjoying, and I was enjoying the story, but the gameplay elements, whilst they were there in the form of mainly quick-time events and dialogue options, were very difficult to actually turn around and say, I am playing this game, purely because it didn't feel like a game. It felt that I was taking part in a story where certain key things that you said and did had an impact on the overall gameplay, but at the same time, it didn't feel as if there was anywhere to fail. It didn't feel as if, even if I managed to mess up on some of the quick time events, that certain things would happen. And I have to admit that whilst the first episode's story grabbed me in and I paid for the rest of the content purely because I wanted to see what happened with the rest of the story, and the game itself wasn't the most important thing for me, it was the story that they were telling. As it progressed, some more of those things that make a game actually started coming to the fore. Now, there's a chase sequence where you have a time bar, which every time you hit a certain sequence means that it goes down in a certain way, and you have to make a choice, split-second choice, whether or not you're going to leap over something, leap to the side, leap to the right. And whilst it's done as a quick time event, to me, that had a lot in common with the latest Lara Croft Tomb Raider, where there were certain points where you were going through rapids or you were going through certain desperately dangerous areas, where you could actually you had to react to what was coming up on screen, and it didn't always tell you what it was that you were supposed to do, and you had a fail state. And not to give a lot of the game away, purely because some of these were because they were so unexpected, there were a couple of times where I found sequences where there was a fail state. You could actually effectively die as a character, which would mean you'd restart from the next checkpoint. Death itself wasn't a major hinder. It didn't hinder you over much, any more than respawning 3 jumps back in other games used to not hinder you much. And basically, as time went on, the actual product as it was grew on me as more of a game than I initially gave it credit for. But at the same time, it is much more of an interactive story, although a very well told one. And it was only slightly marred by, at one point, my dialogue options for some reason turned into Spanish from English, and it's only fortunate that I have a passing acquaintance with the Romance languages that I was able to follow the gist of what each of the options were, and I was able to complete the message dialogues the way in which I would have done normally, even if I could have understood them in my native tongue. So that is a very small quibble compared to the quality of the product. But we're in this time where we are actually talking about other people having done, and I'm using air quotes here, but you won't be able to see it, using air quotes, games, and you know who I'm talking about with the literally who's, where their games, again in air quotes, aren't that great, whether they be art pieces, and they're more of an interactive story rather than a game, and you know exactly which piece of software that I'm talking about, and the person behind that. To me, it was still much more of a game with The Wolf Among Us than theirs, because not only did you have a stylized graphical way of doing things, there were times when you could miss information, which as you normally do, you can do in point and click puzzle games, adventure games. You can you made decisions as a character which, when you meet this person again, you have radically altered their reactions towards you because of your decision. And that could be anything from that you've given someone a chance to talk, to hitting them, to seriously injuring them, to killing them. And as the game's gone on, those decisions multiply, and they have more and more of an effect, so that it no longer becomes an interactive story any more than the ending montage of Fallout New Vegas is less of the story. There are decisions that you've taken throughout the game that at the end of the game drastically influence the final game state as to whether or not you get an ending that you want. and if you have done certain things in a certain way, it may not feel like there has been a fail state at the time that you've done them, but can have a significant deleterious effect on the game much later on. Now, the reason I can say this is because I have a friend who will play games until they have been flogged to the very utmost they can be. And I'm looking at you, Stick, because one of the games that he once borrowed from me was a Bloodlines game, the Vampire the Masquerade, on the PC. And you can choose one of several clans, you can be both male and female, you get various skill sets, and throughout the game, whether or not you're male or female has an impact on certain dialogue choices, and your skill sets have impact on your dialogue choices, and sometimes your clan has impact on your dialogue choices and the way in which you can approach boss fights. Think something like Human Revolution, Deus Ex. If you decide to go in all guns blazing, you can play the game one way. If you want to be a sneaky beaky and tranquilise everybody, you can play that way. And it's a similar sort of thing, only there was about 16 different ways in which you could play the game at a certain level and have significantly different experiences. And I know, because I've spoken to him about this at length, just how much time that he put into the game, just so that he could see every single different variation that he could find. And I know, from past experience, that giving The Wolf Among Us to him, whilst it doesn't have the same length and longevity that Bloodlines did, he would have a similar experience. Now, it's not a long game. I think it took me just about an hour for each chapter, and I'm sort of wandering around. I'm looking at scenery. I'm making sure that I can look at as much as possible, purely because that's the kind of person I am. I'm the kind of person that at the start of Deus Ex, for instance, was making sure that I clicked on everything that was absolutely clickable before I then go on to the main game. And with him being that sort of person, I know that he will get at least 3 or 4 times that amount of gameplay out of it, because he will want to go back and change this decision and then see what happens if he plays it again and changes this decision into that one, or if he does something else with somebody else, what happens, and so that he can see how the storyline diverges across the 5 episodes. So, although it cost £10 on the Xbox Live Store to get the season pass, which was to get the rest of the content, I, for one, felt it was a high quality experience, although short-lived. And again, the fact that it's taken me around about the 5 to 7 hour mark, bearing in mind that I'm not rushing through everything, I'm taking my time. There are times when I'm getting distracted, and that would obviously add to my game time because I have to answer a phone or something similar. I'm saying it's dealt me several days worth of gameplay when I've had the time to play and I've felt good enough to play. So I'm more than happy with the money that I've spent on it, and I know that someone like Stick, he would get far more gameplay out of it, purely because he will have that whole, well, let's see what happens if I do this. Now, I know that later on, when I have friends around, I will have a kick at seeing what decisions they make on a different save file. I will be looking at them going, yeah, that's awesome, I didn't do it that way. I wondered what happened if I chose that, but you've chosen it for me, I don't need to play again. So there will be a knock-on benefit for me, socially, from this experience, and this means that for me, it's what it is. Now, this all feeds back into opinioned pieces that we've had from various games magazine websites and Gamergate, where they have looked at an experience and they have looked at what they would take away from it, and they haven't looked at the technical detail, they haven't looked at all these other bits and pieces, and they've gone, oh no, there's tits in that, I'll mark it down 2 points because I don't agree with tits in games. And things like that. And this is what we need to try and steer away from. And today, I am merely saying that we have castigated a certain type of game in the past, not because of who the developer is, but because of the way in which the gameplay evolves. And the shallowness of the experience, and the fact that it doesn't pull us in, and it doesn't give us what we want from what we would call a game. And yet, taking virtually the same principle, where you have a controlled linear storyline which has to evolve in a certain way with limited choices over an episodic period of narrative, and there's 5 separate narrative blocks, and decisions in block 1 will impact on decisions in block 5. When you look at the way in which Telltale Games have managed to put together this jigsaw of something and say, look, this is what it is, we hope you enjoy it, and other people turn around and say, well, is it really a game? And we can look at someone else's work where we've gone, that's not a game, that's an interactive art project, that doesn't really have what we look for in a game, is it a game? And we can then look at a game which is sold on the market and must have done pretty well, otherwise it wouldn't still be available, and say, look, it's virtually the same sort of pattern in terms of beginning, middle, end, linear narrative, decisions made impact gameplay, and you get 2 completely different experiences. One of which you can, on the left hand, say is, that's not really a game, that's really quite poor. As a game, it isn't really a game, it's more of an interactive story. And then you're looking at virtually identical kind of start and say, yeah, I'm a little bit iffy on this, I'm not too sure, is it a game? And then the more that you dig and the more that you actually get involved in it, you can actually see the gameplay elements and say, you know what, this is a game. It is what it is. It's a story told in episodes, and it works. And it's because, and I'm just taking this time because this is something different to actually say that as I was playing this game, I was conflicted, because on the one hand, I have played the games that we all know, Depression Quest, Gone Home, and on the other hand, I have played The Wolf Among Us, and yet between the two, you could argue that they form part of this subset that we've been arguing about on the pro and anti game is what is a game and are games art. Now, for the emotional response that I got from The Wolf is Among Us when it's finished, I have no doubt that as a form of storytelling, it is now beginning to really take hold and surpass what most people would consider to be traditional storytelling. And the other games that I mentioned, which we say aren't really games, haven't managed to hit that. So it manages to impact on something else. It actually managed to hit you in the feels, for want of a better term. And therefore, for this reason, I'm calling this episode of Shooting Straight Confessions of a Gamer, because I have to confess, whilst I say on one hand that is not a game, and on the other hand this is, it is purely down to the subjective experience that I have had as a gamer whilst playing, in inverted commas, across all 3 types, and actually being able to say, this is a game, this is not a game. If anyone wants to take me to task for this and actually go through the points that I make on both on the blog, where this has been shared, and on the previous podcast, where we actually go through what is a game, please feel free. I will enjoy all feedback. And I have unbelievably managed to talk now for 20 minutes without even thinking about it. So I bid you farewell. I thank you once again for listening. I am, as always, on Twitter, on YouTube and elsewhere at Voice of the Forge, and thank you very much for listening.